On this edition of Bay Area Bountiful, we'll go on a spirited discovery. First, we'll explore an eco-friendly distillery that creates locally sourced spirits and hosts outreach events to foster more sustainable communities. Then we'll meet two sisters creating farm-to-table bourbon and whiskey. Finally, we'll step into one of San Francisco's longest-standing brewpubs serving up organic beer. It's all coming up next on Bay Area Bountiful.
Bay Area Bountiful is made possible in part by Rocky the free-range chicken and Rosie the original organic chicken. The Sonoma County Agricultural Preservation and Open Space District, Made Local Magazine, and Sonoma County Go Local, and through the generous support of Sonoma Water. Cultivate, celebrate, connect.
The distilling of good spirits is both an art and a science. Griffo Distillery in Petaluma has implemented a multi-pronged, eco-friendly approach that includes a zero-waste philosophy, a focus on energy efficiency, as well as the use of recycled and repurposed materials for their operations. Their secret to good distillation and good living share the same formula.
When I was interviewing for my last job, I told my boss that I was going to open up a distillery one day, and he just smiled and looked at me and said, "Yeah, me too." And we were able to bond over that. But then on the day when I quit my job, I told him that I was quitting because I was going to go open up Griffo Distillery. And my boss looked at me shocked and he said, "No, that's what you're supposed to say, not actually do." Where I got my start in distilling was actually in a laboratory. I was an undergraduate at Berkeley, where I was distilling in a physics lab. We were doing things with carbon nanotubes and boron nitride nanotubes and things like that, things that you don't want to drink. So this is our still. Her name's Betty, and she's made in Louisville, Kentucky. It's basically just a huge version of a laboratory still. It's a piece of artwork, as far as I'm concerned. Everyone should have one of these in their living room. Depending on what you're fermenting, that's going to produce a different type of spirit. If you ferment grain, basically you're making beer, and when you distill beer, that turns into whiskey. When you take grapes and you ferment that, you make wine. And when you distill wine, you make a brandy. You heat up the alcohol that you created and you evaporate it off, and you collect that alcohol that you evaporated off. And that alcohol that you collect is the spirit that you end up drinking, whether it's a vodka, a brandy, a whiskey, a gin, or a rum. That all comes from that first fermentation process.
We put everything into this. We put our heart, we put our time, we put every dollar we had. Like, our still is was our life savings. Over the decade that we've been saving and then building and then running this place, there's been a lot of really low moments. But I think one thing that's made us really strong and able to get through those moments is that we're both really tough people.
Yeah, I mean, running small businesses takes a lot of grit.
We both have been able to kind of balance each other out. So I'll be hitting a moment of like, oh my God, can we keep doing this? Can we keep working this many hours and struggling this much? And he'll make sure to stay up and be the one that's holding us during that time. And then it'll flip, and I'll need to be the one that holds him up. And then to see it start to turn and to be able to celebrate that with your partner and with your family, It's a really special thing. I feel like you can taste those years and years of dreaming and the years and years of saving and the years and years of building. I think you can taste that in the sip. You know how like you look at some people who are smiling and there's a sparkle in their eye? It's like that on a moment. It's something that you know that was created with love and care and intention, and then you're tasting all that flavor and the complexity and the beauty of it, and it makes a moment extra magical. You let yourself think about what you're sipping when you taste anything he's made. Your mind just has many different places to race, different ideas to consider. It's almost thought-provoking when you drink something he's made. All of those guys are throwing yeast up into the air. We're catching those yeast in our tank. So we think of it as our own version of a terroir. We don't grow in the soil, right? We grow in the tank, and we're catching all of that local flavor. So no one else can make the same flavors that we can make here.
My heritage is Italian. In Italy, they say, the best meal is when they take, the perfect ripe tomato from the garden and cut it in half and present it. But really, you're just trying to take really good ingredients and present them as cleanly as possible. And that's definitely what we try to do here. The Babylonians in Mesopotamia started distilling, and then it really formalized more into a science in Alexandria when the Romans were there, when people were trying to create that eau de vie. They were trying to discover the essence of life. Back then, the scientists were taking flowers and plants and animals and any sort of living thing and trying to distill them to find out what we're made of. I'm a scientist, and so at heart, I'm really data-driven. We measure different temperatures and pressures throughout the still. Using a little bit of physics, we can back out what the ABV is of the vapor inside of the still. We collect as much data as possible because it really helps us fine-tune what we're doing. But we still distill completely by our palate, and we taste everything that's coming through. When we distill, what we're really doing is kind of acting like a prism for light. If you shine white light into a prism, the prism separates it out into all the different colors that make up that white light. And when we're distilling, we're taking that grape or that grain and we're putting it through our still, which separates it out into all the different aromatics that you can expect. Because we're gonna drink it, we choose which colors we want to drink. On the outside, you see big copper stills and barrels, and there's a certain romance to it, and it seems really cool. And once you're on the inside doing it, I think you realize it's actually even cooler than it looks on the outside.
Home-Based Spirits produces farm-to-table bourbon and whiskey. With a commitment to sourcing from a local supply chain, Home-Based creates California spirits that reflect the fresh flavors of the region, while respecting age-old traditions.
I'm Allie, and Samantha is my twin sister.
And I'm Samantha. I'm Allie's twin sister. Our first products are whiskey. We make everything from scratch.
Home-Based brings a fresher take on not only the flavor and kind of the style of whiskey we're making, but the whole kind of packaging.
We love the history of whiskey, and it is something that we think is really fun to make, especially in the United States, and having bourbon be such a classic American drink. And we knew that we didn't want to compete with our favorite established traditional spirits.
We don't come from a family of great-grandfathers who are moonshiners and the secret recipe that was handed down from generations back.
Our business was all about infusing freshness to how to produce whiskey. What matters most to us is ingredient sourcing and spending our time and energy on producing really quality whiskey. We knew that with high quality ingredients that are grown really well, that it would be delicious.
What makes whiskey whiskey is that it's made from grain. It's fermented and distilled and then aged in a wooden container.
It's the same process, and it's been made the same way for a long time. There's just
We're not trying
to do
to
it.
speed anything up. We
Yeah.
put them in barrels and just let them sit.
Yeah.
We're making whiskey kind of the same way it's always been made.
Being sisters, we've always enjoyed working together. Despite being twins, we're actually pretty different. And what we've found through starting this business together is that we actually have very different strengths. Allie really is great at the production and her palate in terms of the blends, and I tend to just lean more towards numbers. We've got every time we import barrels, we have to submit a record of that. Every time we bottle and sell bottles, we have to submit a record of that.
I'm really good at putting the corks in and all the labeling.
We are a very small business, and that means that we literally do everything by hand, which includes labeling every single bottle.
We both respect so much about what the other person is doing that it just makes it a really complementary kind of partnership.
So this is one of our 30-gallon barrels. It's one of the next barrels that's going to be ready for us to bottle soon. So we like to taste it and make sure it's doing okay.
We do like to sample as they go along. And also it's nice to crack open barrels once in a while to kind of get some oxygen, let them breathe a little bit.
I have been working in agriculture for the past 10 years. For me, the connection between a creative pursuit through the craft of making spirits matched really well with my interest in wanting to support local and family farms.
For me, it was not only a love of whiskey, but also a creative outlet. So it was definitely a combo of what our passions were. And there was a need for it. We really didn't see a lot of whiskeys on the market that were being very transparent about how they were being made, where the ingredients were coming from.
I had been on the East Coast, and I ended up meeting some farmers that were starting to build distilleries because spirits or other types of alcoholic beverages were a great value-added product.
Starting this business together was, I think, really what prompted her move home, which she had been promising to do for 9 years. So for us, it was like, this is really our home base. It was her homecoming and getting to start the business here where we grew up. I got really into whiskey when I was working and living in San Francisco. It was kind of an intimidating thing to get into. I felt really unsure when I would go to bars to order something, so I just wanted to learn more about it. Starting to think about it more of an agricultural product, whereas with wine and beer, I think you're always kind of thinking about the ingredients, like wine, they promote what grape it's being made from. Whereas like whiskey doesn't really do that. There's a lot of kind of secrecy behind the whole method. I wanted to learn about like why something was tasting one way versus another way. To me, that was all telling part of the story of whiskey.
If we learn to love whiskey just by understanding more about the ingredients and the process, we think a lot more people would be into whiskey. What we think sets us apart is that we want to share all of this information with our customers. We put on our website for every batch that we release, who distilled it, who grew the grain, when it was made, what kinds of barrels it was aged in, where the barrels came from. All those different components do affect the flavor in each batch.
We love the way like Kentucky bourbons taste. We don't necessarily want to compete with a classic Kentucky style bourbon, so we really tried to kind of push the bourbon flavor boundaries, and for us that was playing around with the mash bill or the recipe of the grains we're using. We do use about 30% malted barley as part of our recipe, which is pretty unique for bourbons. You don't see that high percentage. It really gives it kind of a malty, grainy, a little bit of like a honey nut flavor to it, and just be able to taste that graininess for us gives it a unique flavor or style, which we like to call a California style bourbon.
Ready to?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's try that.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
To your health. It's a good bourbon.
Really good. It goes down very easy.
Being brand new whiskey producers, we also felt really strongly that if we started with really high quality ingredients, we were going to end up with a high quality product.
The malted barley was the hardest ingredient to source. We were excited to stumble across Mecca grade in Oregon. They're one of the first farmers to grow, harvest, and malt all their barley on one farm.
We've also started working with a malt house that opened up here in the Bay Area called Admiral Maltings in Alameda, and they do a traditional floor malting method.
Floor malting is a traditional style of malting barley where you lay out all of your recently soaked barley kernels onto a huge open floor, and then you churn it until it germinates, and then they kiln all of the grain in big ovens.
It's great that that's all happening in California, because then it will give local brewers and distillers a local option.
You can find home-based bourbon at several bars, restaurants, and retailers in the Bay Area. We self-distribute, so it's where I can drive to.
This is delicious. I'm super glad that it's local.
Home base.
A lot of people say it is very easy to drink.
They really love drinking it, neat, having it just plain in a glass. It is really smooth, even at 46%. So for us, that is a huge compliment that someone wants to just drink it plain and really enjoy the flavors that come from it. And that being said, it also makes a really mean cocktail.
I'm pretty sure it's on the menu right now at Nito and Nito's backyard in a hot toddy
But we can't
backyard.
talk about it.
We have 2 kids. We haven't been out for drinks in so long.
The end of 2018, we both became pregnant, and that actually is a little hard to be pregnant and run a spirits company at the same time. When our kids grow up, we hope that our dedication to the process and integrity that we try and maintain comes through, and hope that they apply similar ethics to whatever industry they decide to go into. Hopefully at the time when they are mature adults that we can have those conversations over some whiskey. Yeah.
San Francisco has a tradition of serving beer with bold and creative flavors. In this story, we hear from the owner and brewmaster of Thirsty Bear, a brewpub offering organic beer that benefits the environment.
I wanted to create a sustainable business in the Bay Area because that's the only way we can carry on as people, as humans, as civilization. It was in 2007 that I decided to take this place organic, because by that time, by 2007, there were opportunities for us to get not just some malt and varieties of different malts, which is the core ingredient in beer. No malt, no beer. Malt is to beer what grapes are to wine. So not only did I need options to purchase different organic malts, but also organic hops. And so it was really not until around then that that even became an option of something that we could do.
At the moment, we have 3 different types of yeast here at Thirsty Bear. We have a lager yeast, which, as I mentioned earlier, is fermented cool, which is to make our Due West, I call it West Coast style Pilsner. And then we also have an ale yeast, which is what I was using. It's a British ale yeast, which I use to ferment this Russian Imperial Stout with. And then we also have a Belgian on it. So what makes it Belgian is, frankly, Belgian yeast. So it's a very important characteristic of a Belgian beer is their yeast strain. So we use that to brew a Saison-like beer.
So one of the constraints on brewing organic in the beginning was the availability of both organic hops and organic malt. And while organic malt increased to some degree as far as the selection, the hops were really one of the most limiting factors at first, because only hops that they had available typically were more non-proprietary hops, not the sexier hops like the Simcoes and Citras and Mosaics and Galaxies, but the more traditional Columbus, Cascade, Centennial, these kind of hops that have been around forever and anyone could just grow.
You cannot taste the difference. Basically, beer is very much an agricultural product. It's barley, it can be wheat, but hops. And these things grow with or without pesticides. So basically we're talking about is the starch in the barley or the essential oils in the hops don't get changed because of the way they're grown, for example. So the flavors and all those things still remain the same. So there's nothing that makes it taste any different.
There's just many other breweries that are embracing the ability to use locally sourced ingredients. There's always less of a carbon footprint if you're getting something local, because it's not shipped in from outside the country or across the country or 1,000 miles away, and how it's grown is critical. So that's another element that we're doing now in terms of our focus on sustainability, is this business of contracting farmers to grow malting quality barley and then malting that. And we do that at a malting facility called Admiral Maltings in Alameda, which is right across the bay adjacent to Oakland there. So yeah.
There's basically roughly 100 different styles of beer that can be created. It's typically broken down in 2 families. It's ales, for example, which is a reference to ale yeast, and then there's lagers, which is a reference to lager yeast, and that has a lot to do with the temperature of the fermentation. So that is sort of the key sort of schism between, you got beer, you got ales and lagers. That's the most fundamental difference. And then you can adjust either ales or lagers to make the flavors and the colors different by adding different types of malt. So if you look at this example, this is basically done with Pilsner malt, so there's a beautiful straw color. And on the opposite spectrum here, we have a Russian Imperial Stout, which is made with what's known as chocolate malt and roasted barley. And as you can see, it's totally different animals.
So I would say if you did everything equal side by side, maybe a tasting panel could distinguish it. But that's not why we choose to be sustainable. That's half the reason perhaps I choose to get organic blueberries, but the other half is the sustainability element and the health to the soil and the workers and the water table and all the insects and animals that interact with your field. Those are the most important reasons to me. Although of course taste is important, I just think it's harder to detect in terms of malt.
One of the great things about organic beer is, besides it tastes great, right? So there's obviously those things. It's not something you can taste, but more importantly, organic beer is good obviously for the environment and also for the workers who are harvesting the barley, the wheat, and even the hops, because obviously there's less pesticide use in those farms and in those little acres where they produce the organic ingredients. So I think that makes it special in that own way, because it's not something you can taste. I mean, the barley and the hops taste exactly like conventional barley and hops. So ultimately it's about protecting the environment and then protecting also the workers themselves.
So not only can we do it organic, but we also do it sustainably in that we will grow it, we will utilize no-till agriculture, which is an agriculture that's primary benefit is carbon sequestration. If you don't plow and till the soil, then the carbon in the soil doesn't meet with the oxygen in the air when it's all plowed and tilled and release greenhouse gases or CO2. Rather, you keep the carbon sequestered in the soil. You keep all the nutrients sequestered in there, the bacteria and the fungi, so the microbiome is healthier. You have healthier plants that need less input. You need less rainfall, about an inch less a year, because you retain more moisture in the soil. So we can control the sustainability of growing our crops. And the crop in and of itself is a drought-tolerant crop, barley. And we can grow it certified organic or no-till to add to the sustainability of what we do here in the brewery.
These producers of beer and spirits are working towards a regenerative relationship between their craft and the environment. Those of us who consume these sustainably made beverages can feel confident that they are partaking in a product that makes the Bay Area bountiful.